Okay. Now, I think we're ready. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as possible. And again, please feel free to jump in. So I muted you all, but that doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you. And so I just want to keep it a little bit organized and less chaotic. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. I think this is amazing that we can all get together, especially in a time where we're being, forced to stay apart from each other, and humans are social creatures, and so I think it's really important that we can get on the internet and interact with each other. So okay, so I'm just reading I think everyone's good now in the comment section. If you don't have a mute button, maybe you can raise your hand and I can possibly help you. And yeah, so, okay. So let's talk about glazes. So I've categorized all the questions into, different topic areas. So I think I'm just gonna jump right in. I might see who's here and answer the questions of the people that are here. So let's see here. Okay. So Matt Little, I saw that you were here. So feel free to unmute yourself if you want to have a chat, and I'll just read your question and then I will talk about it. So you had two questions, I think. So the first question is, in regards to cone 6, mole percent, and glaze melt, is there a guideline to percentages needed for a good melt? For example, a satin glaze I'm working on has 20% flux, 4% boron, 12% alumina, 65% silica. It seems to melt well, but I'm having issues with micro bubbles in parts of the glaze that are thick. Okay, so so in response to that, you're working in mole percent, which I'm not super familiar with. I tend to go with the UMF. Oh, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hello.
There. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So you weren't able to unmute yourself?
No, it said that you had me muted. Yeah.
Oh. So I'm sorry. Yeah. We'll just keep trying.
Right.
So okay. So if anyone else wants to jump in, please just say something, and hopefully I can unmute you as well. So Matt, are you familiar with the UMF?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I generally don't look at the mole percent, and
Okay.
so these numbers don't really make a lot of sense to me.
Sure.
But if you had the glaze up in Glazy, and I could look at the UMF, then I would be able to.
Yeah, it's listed as better satin 3 on Glazy. That's 65525, I think, is the glaze number.
Okay.
I don't know if you can pull it up now or not, but
I think I can. So
or here.
Recipes, better satin 3.
Yeah, let's see. Here, I can share my screen. Can you see that?
Oh, perfect. Yes. Nice. Okay, so if you scroll down to the UMF, and so your question was about glaze, micro bubbles.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm seeing with this glaze, so what I look at is the alumina level. Often when, if a glaze is having a hard time melting. Like you say, it melts well, but you're having micro bubbles, which might mean that the glaze needs to be a little more fluid
Right.
for those bubbles to have the ability to move and release. And so what I see with this glaze is you have a 0.6 alumina level, which is on the high side for
Right.
sure.
Okay.
So alumina in a glaze is what increases the melted viscosity. So the higher your alumina level, the thicker, the more like syrup your glaze will be, as opposed to low viscosity, which would be like really runny, like water.
Mm-hmm.
So the more alumina that you have in your glaze, the less things are kind of able to move around. So that would be the value that I would be trying to lower in this particular glaze.
Sure. Then that makes sense. I guess what I was running into was crazing issues, and I was trying to lower the expansion of the glaze by increasing the silica.
Yes.
But I wanted to keep the same silica to alumina ratio so that it's still a satin.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So to eliminate crazing or to reduce crazing, there are two ways to go about it. So the first way is you increase your silica and alumina levels. You want to keep the ratio the same. So, if your silica to alumina ratio is 5.3, which is just above 5, which is why the glaze is a satin matte. So you can increase your silica and alumina levels and keep that ratio the same, but that doesn't always work. And so what you're probably experiencing is your glaze is starting to dry up before you actually fix the crazing. And I have had this trouble in the past. And so you have a flux ratio here of 0.3 to 0.7, or fairly close. So what I would recommend would be to reduce the R2O and increase the RO, because as far as thermal expansion goes, sodium and potassium have, like the R2O fluxes have a much higher thermal expansion than the RO fluxes. So if you reduce your R2O, bringing up your RO, then that is another way to get rid of crazing. And you can come down to an R2O of around 0.2, so you can have a 0.2 to 0.8 ratio and still be perfectly food safe and durable. The only issue with lowering your R2O, the magic flux ratio is supposed to be 0.3 to 0.7.
Right.
0.2 to 0.8 is just as good as long as your glaze is perfectly melted. So if you lower your R2O to a point where it's not even melting, where it's not becoming fully melted, then that's when you're going to have durability issues. But as long as your glaze is fully melted, then you can go down to 0.2 to 0.8. And like my clear glaze is at a ratio of 0.18 to 0.82. And that's just because I'm glazing porcelain, and so that was to reduce the crazing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm working with a white stoneware. It's pretty similar to porcelain, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gives you some ideas, and
yeah.
Hopefully everyone else is following along and nodding their heads, because I probably took the most complicated question to start out. But I saw that you were here, so I wanted to answer your question. So
well, thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so moving on, I have a getting started section here. Okay, so I have a question from Cindy Capellen. I don't know if you're here, but if you are, you can let me know in the chat and I can unmute you. And I'm just scanning the room. I don't see you in here. So, but a couple people had a similar question. So the question is, as a total newbie, can you suggest the minimum components you feel I would need to start making glazes? If this is too basic, I totally understand. I'll just listen and learn. So of course, this is not too basic. And how many of you are brand new to mixing glazes, or if you've never mixed a glaze before? Hi, Wendy. Okay, so what I have is a blog post that is called What You Need to Start Mixing Glazes. So I'm gonna just, I'm gonna post a link in the comments section. And you could also try to search, hopefully you can all grab the link. But if you wanted to search, my website is sumacloudceramics.com. And I have a blog post that's called What You Need to Start Mixing Your Glazes. So here I am posting in the chat a link. And this post, I've given a list of ingredients that I would buy if I was just starting out. And that kind of like covers a wide range of glazes. And so I wonder if I could share my screen. Let's see. Yes. So I'm sharing my screen. Do you guys see that? My website? Yes? Okay. So this is the post. So basically, this gives a shopping list of ingredients that you can buy and the amounts that I would buy. And I just chose, you know, the smallest amount that I would get or that my supplier has available. And this is basically for $125. You can make a whole bunch of glazes, different types of glazes with this list. So hopefully that is a good starting point. And let's see. Someone asked, what was the question again? The question was, is there a list of materials that you would start? Let's see. The minimum components you feel I would need to start mixing glazes. And so that list would be a good start. Can you suggest minimum component needed? Oh, thank you, Corey. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. And Karen, my Q&A doesn't let me ask a question. Oh, because you're a panelist. Okay, you can post questions in the chat here as well. And I'll just try to keep my eyes on the chat. Sorry, this feels super awkward, but we're making it work, right? Okay. So I'm gonna move on to another question. Let's see here. So Linda Colbeck, if you're here, feel free to let me know if you want to chat. So here's Linda's question. I have a small cone 0405 kiln and I'm wondering if I should start making clear and white glazes first. Any basic recommendations on how to start and build up my glaze mixing confidence? Yes. Okay. So a good way to start is actually, okay. Sorry, I'm just checking out the chat. So a good way to start is to start with a clear or a base glaze. Like, it doesn't have to be a clear glaze, and add colorants. So if you start with a clear glaze and then you add colorants, then you're most likely going to get a transparent glaze of different colors. So you could have, you could add copper carbonate, which will give you, between the greens and the blues. You could add red iron oxide, nickel, cobalt, manganese. These are all the colorants. Starting with a base recipe, and if you start with a white glaze and you add colorants, then you're going to get an opaque colored glaze. So depending on what you start with, is going to kind of, your base glaze is going to set the tone for when you add colorants. But that is a really good way to start mixing glazes and a good way to find a wide range of glazes that are going to be compatible with each other. Because if you start with a or if all of your glazes have the same base and then you're overlapping them, it just means that you're, and you have one on the inside, one on the outside. It means your glazes are going to have the same thermal expansion, which is helpful, because if you have a glaze with high thermal expansion on the inside and then low thermal expansion on the outside, sometimes the tension can be so great that it can crack your pots, and that can lead to denting. So having one base recipe that you add colorants to, it just means that all your glazes are going to be compatible. Now, the limitation to this is that you're not going to necessarily like all the colors that you get from one base recipe. And so this is what, when I was first starting out, I was like, okay, I'm just going to take one glaze and I'm going to do all the colors, and then that's all I'm going to use, and it's going to be really simple. But what I found is like, okay, I have this glaze. It looks really good with copper, but I really don't like the blue that it shows up with cobalt. And so then I find myself like, oh, well, I don't actually really like this blue glaze, so I want to find another glaze. Or sometimes when you use two different base recipes, when they overlap with each other, that's when you get some really interesting effects, because the glaze that's on the bottom might start melting first, and then the glaze on the top kind of starts melting later, and then just the way that they intermingle can be a lot more interesting if you have two different bases. So there's always pros and cons to any method that you choose, but when you're first starting out, I definitely recommend finding a base recipe, a clear or a white, or you could try both. And then testing it with all the colorants, and then you can decide if you want to keep exploring. And hopefully by then you'll kind of see how glaze testing goes, and you'll catch the bug and just want to keep testing everything, which that's kind of what happened to me. So Judy says a great base to start with is Hansen's 520. Yes, you can say that. So glazey.org, for those of you who aren't aware, I'm just typing in the chat. Oh wait, glazey.org. So there's a link to glazey.org in the chat. Glazey.org is a recipe sharing website where everyone around the world has uploaded their glaze recipes with pictures and descriptions, and then you can look at the chemistry like I was doing earlier with Matt. So when you get to that level where you're analyzing glaze recipes, then all that information is there for you, but you don't have to pay attention to that in the beginning. In the beginning, it's a really good place to just search for recipes and find new recipes, and then if you have a collection of recipes, then you can upload your recipes with pictures and just keep a catalog, and you can keep your recipes private, or you can publish them and share them with the public, and so that's up to you. But glazey.org is a really good resource, and I know Derek, who is the creator of Glazey, he's recently published a whole bunch of help videos like for using the site, and so I think he said they're all a minute and under, so really quick little tutorials that you can use to kind of get started there. So that is a good resource that I would point you to. So I am just looking through the comments here, see if there's another question. Okay, I'm going to take another question from pre-submitted question. Okay, so this is kind of related. If I want to make, this is Loretta Betting. So if you're here, please join the chat if you would like, or let me know, and I can add you. Just a second. So Loretta Benning, I'm here. Okay, I don't know if I can see you on my screen. I'm looking for you. So can you unmute yourself? I'm going to see if I can find you and unmute you. Oh, she'd rather not. Okay, yeah, no worries at all. Okay, so I'll read your question and then I'll answer it. But if anyone else wants to jump in, I would like to interact with all of you. So if I want to make a small batch of colored clear glaze, what percentage or weight of mason stain can I add to 500 milliliters of clear? So 500 milliliters. So I tend to work in grams. So this can make it, once your glaze has already been mixed with water, it can make it a little bit tricky to add colorants. So if I was making 500 grams of a clear, you already have the clear made up. Yeah. So if I was making 500 grams, then I would add 10%. You can use 5 to 10% mason stain in a glaze. That's kind of generally the amount that we use. We make colored slips at the studio where I work, and so all of them have 10% mason stain. If you're starting with a wet glaze, all you can really do is guess because it's hard. Yeah, so you could, here's a test that you could do. If you have 500 milliliters of clear glaze, do you have a larger bucket that you're wanting to take 500 milliliters out of, or do you just have 500 milliliters? Okay, so if you have a large bucket of glaze and you want to test colorants, what you can do is the first thing you need to do is measure the specific gravity, because that is going to tell you how much water is in your glaze recipe. And I can talk a little bit more about specific gravity in a second. So if you measure the specific gravity of your large bucket of glaze before you take any out, then what you can do is just a little experiment. So you can measure specific gravity, say it's 1.5. So then you take out 500 milliliters of glaze and just make sure that your glaze is mixed really, really well before you remove your small sample. And then, so 500 milliliters, I'm trying to think of around how much glaze that would be. If you had 500 grams, you'd be adding 50 grams of mason stain. So you could probably, I don't know, maybe start with 20 grams of mason stain. And you could do, like, you could start with 20 grams and then do 30 grams and 40 grams and just do tests that way. And then the way you would repeat that is to make sure your base glaze is at the same specific gravity, and then remove the exact same volume of glaze, and then you know how many grams you added to that last batch, so you can kind of repeat. It's not the most scientific, but it's the way that you're going to get the closest. But you have to make sure that you have that specific gravity number to start with, so that the next time you pull a sample from your large bucket of glaze, you know that it has the exact same amount of water and the exact same amount of dry materials. Because the specific gravity of a glaze is the ratio of solid particles to water. So if you always have the same ratio of solid particles to water, then if you pull out 500 milliliters, that 500 milliliters should have the same number of solid particles as the last time you pulled out 500 milliliters. So this is the most scientific we can kind of get, like with working with wet glazes. And so specific gravity, measuring specific gravity gives you a baseline to understand the ratio of solid particles to water. Loretta says, thank you. So that means that must have been helpful. So I'm really glad. So really quickly, specific gravity, I wonder if I just want to quickly explain how to measure specific gravity. because that is like, it's really the simplest, but most important thing that you can learn how to do for your glazes. It's going to help you get consistent results, better glaze results, because when your water level goes up and down, which it will do naturally, your water is going to go down, your glaze is going to seem thick, you're going to add more water. If you can really control the amount of water in your glazes, then you are, sorry, I'm just searching my computer, then you're going to be most likely to have the same results from firing to firing. And that's what we want, right? Like when we open our kilns and we see something amazing, and then we're like, how am I ever going to do that again? This is how. It's by measuring specific gravity, so that you are controlling your glaze application, and you're making sure that, you know, when you do a 3-second dip into a glaze that has the same specific gravity as the last time you do a 3-second dip into a glaze, then your glaze application layer is going to be the same as last time. And it's the glaze application thickness that often is the biggest contributing factor to how the glaze appears after the firing. So a really thick glaze can look very different than a very thin layer of glaze. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly here. A lot of you have probably seen this already. If you've been on my list for any amount of time. So I'm just going to pull, oh, okay. So I'm just going to quickly show you the instructions for measuring specific gravity, because it's really easy. So all you need is a scale, a graduated cylinder, and a calculator. So basically, you take and you don't need a graduated cylinder. This is what I use. Some people use a syringe, and but what you want is an accurate volume measuring device. So the more slender your container is, the more accurate your volume measurements are going to be. So if you have a really wide container, then each of those increments is going to be a large volume, whereas this graduated cylinder, each increment is only 5 milliliters. And so the skinnier your weighing device container is, then the more accurate your measurements are going to be. So you take your container, you stick it on your scale, you tare it so that it reads 0, like so. Then you want to mix your glaze really, really well, because if your glaze isn't mixed and homogenized really well, then all your heavier particles might be settling on the bottom, all the water rises to the top. So you want to make sure that the whole glaze has the same amount of water and solid particles. So mixing is very important with a high-speed mixer. Then you pour some of your glaze into the graduated cylinder. And it doesn't matter the amount. So some people try to get exactly 100 milliliters, which is what I tried to do in the beginning. But I found it so tedious to fill it like right to the 100 milliliter mark, and then it would go over, and I tried to pour a little bit out. And what I realized is that more milliliters is gonna weigh more. The ratio is always going to be the same. So I just kind of fill it up to one of the lines. And what you're doing is you're taking the weight of your glaze in grams, and then you're dividing it by the volume in milliliters. And when you divide, so this example was 690 grams divided by 450 milliliters. So my specific gravity, which is also the density of your glaze, is 1.53 grams per milliliter. So if you measure your glaze and it's at 1.53 grams per milliliter, and then say 5 months goes by, and you want to use this glaze and you want to get the same results that you are getting now, then all you need to do to make sure that you have the exact same amount of water in your glaze is you bring that specific gravity back to 1.53. And then when you have the same amount of water the same ratio of water to solid particles, then your glaze application layer is going to be consistent as long as your application methods are consistent. Your bisque porosity needs to be consistent. So if you're bisque firing to 06 and then 04 and then 05, then that's going to change the size of the open pores in your bisque. So all of these things are factors in glazing consistently, but this is the first important step, is to make sure that you have consistent water. So if anyone doesn't have this, you can go to sumacloudceramics.com/SG guide, and I will put it in the chat. And you can download it. And let me just write that out here. / Okay, so there's a link, and then you can get that PDF sent to you. So I'm just gonna go read through the comments here and see what you have to say. Do you calculate specific gravity for the base, or do you do it after you add the colorants? I do it just with whatever glaze that's already mixed with water that I am currently using. So, so to the base, after you add colorants, it's just basically getting the water level consistent. Let's see, a lot of recipes don't mention the specific gravity ratio. How do you go about it when you start testing a glaze? Which specific gravity do you start with? So a lot of recipes don't mention the specific gravity because it is a personal preference. So what I like to do is take a glaze. If you're mixing it from scratch, then you can mix it with minimal water content. And so I start with 50 to 60% water. So that's going to be quite a thick glaze in the bucket. Start with, and if you're starting with an existing glaze, what you can do is let the glaze settle out, remove some water, and get it to be as thick as possible. And then measure the specific gravity and dip a test tile. And then add a little bit of water, mix the glaze really well, measure specific gravity, dip another test tile. And I would do this from whatever the top specific gravity is. So as you add water, you're bringing the specific gravity down because the specific gravity of water is 1. And so you could think of it this way, that as you add water, you're bringing the number closer to 1. And so if your specific gravity is 1.6 and you add water, then it's going to lower. And so if you keep going, adding water, bring that specific gravity right down to about 1.4, even lower if you like. We keep most of our glazes between 1.4 and 1.55. So at the studio where I work, we have about 20 large buckets of glazes that get used on a regular basis. And we've kind of figured out the specific gravity that we like the best for each of those glazes. And so that's a good way for you to take your glaze and then test it at different specific gravity levels and then decide what looks best, because some glazes change color when they're thin versus thick, and you might not like it when it's thin, you might like it when it's thick. Some glazes might be prone to running when they're too thick, so then you might want to bring the specific gravity down so that it's not running. And specific gravity isn't going to change. If a glaze is overfired and that's why it's running, it's not going to fix that, but it is going to help with a glaze that is running because the application is just too thick. So 1.5, a good target for most glazes. It's a fairly good average to start with. So if I wanted to just pick a number and start with that, that 1.5 is where I would start. What I did when I first started was I asked around on the internet, what other people were doing, and I kind of took all their answers and decided I would bring all of the recipes to 1.45. And I found that to be a little on the low side for certain glazes. So 1.5, I would start out with 1.5, and then some glazes might be able to come down, but it's much harder to increase the specific gravity of a glaze because that requires removing water. And so as your glaze sits over time and water naturally evaporates, then the specific gravity will go up. You can always remove water from the top after letting your glaze settle for a bit. You can kind of siphon some water off the top. I like to keep that water. So if I'm ever removing water from a glaze for any reason, I keep it in a little container with the glaze's name on it. And then when I inevitably need to add water back into that glaze, then I add the water that I had removed originally, because our glazes contain some soluble materials. And so if any of our materials have dissolved into the water, that means that they're no longer solid particles, that they have dissolved and become part of the water. If you remove any of that water, then you are kind of screwing with the chemistry of the glaze. So I always keep it, set it aside, and then eventually you're always going to have to add water back to a glaze because water naturally evaporates. So someone's cat says, I target 1.45 with the new recipe. Yeah, and that's what I started with. Is 0.5 a critical difference? No, it can make, with some glazes, 0.5, well, you probably mean 0.05, will make a little difference, but it's not a huge difference. But in some glazes, like we recently found a glaze just looks way better at 1.5 rather than 1.45. And so we had been making it at 1.45, then we made a thick batch one day, just tested it out, and it looked better. And as long as it's not running with a thicker application, because a higher specific gravity is going to give you a thicker application, as long as it's not running onto your kiln shelves, I would always go for less water over more water. And the reason for that is because our bisque becomes saturated with water. So when we glaze our pots, we've got this bucket with solid particles mixed with water. And so we dip our bisque into the glaze, and the bisque absorbs the water. So it sucks the water out of the glaze and leaves the glaze to dry on the outside. But the water doesn't immediately evaporate. It's being held in the bisque, and then it slowly evaporates over time. So once your bisque becomes completely saturated with water, meaning all the pores in the bisque are full of water, then it can no longer absorb any more glaze, and then you're going to have application issues. And so it's helpful, if your glazes have a lot of water in it, then it's not going to take much time or much of a glaze layer before your bisque becomes saturated with water. And then once your bisque is completely saturated, it's no longer absorbent, then it's going to behave like a piece that's already been fired. And if you've ever tried to glaze a piece that's already been fired to its maturing temperature, and it's already vitrified, you know, like you'll dip your piece in and then the glaze just runs back off into the bucket. It doesn't stick to the piece anymore because the pottery needs those pores to draw the water in, and that's what helps the glaze particles to stick to the bisque, and then the water evaporates out of the bisque over time. So hopefully that that clears that up. Let's see here, just reading your comments. So the only time you deflocculate or flocculate is when the specific gravity is changed. Okay, I will move on to flocculation and deflocculation. So after you measure specific gravity, so this is how I decide if a glaze needs to be flocculated or deflocculated. Once I get my specific gravity to the number that I want, so say it's 1.5. We'll go with 1.5. That's going to work for a lot of glazes. So we adjust the water first because the water is a calculated measurement. So it's not really based on intuition. Oh, I think it's too thick. I think it's too thin. Opinions. It's like you're dividing grams by milliliters. And so there isn't really much room for interpretation. So I really like starting with this calculated measurement to get to a baseline, a foundation, and then I can decide whether I think the glaze is too thick or too thin. So for example, just a second. Okay, so for example, we have this sapphire blue glaze here. So this is like a really bright, vibrant blue recipe. When I start adding, so as you can see here, it's running. This glaze is super drippy. The specific gravity is 1.68. As I add water to the glaze, this glaze at 1.68, this is with 60% water, I believe, or 50% water, so a very minimal amount of water. As I add water to this glaze, I'm bringing the specific gravity down, but the glaze physically in the bucket is becoming really, really thin and watery. And so once I get, let's see, so here's the same glaze at specific gravity 1.5. So it's a totally different color. And that's because the viscosity of this glaze in the bucket is very, very low. So I added enough water to make the glaze really, really thin and watery in the bucket. So once I flocculated this glaze, this is how it looks. So we're back to that vibrant blue color that we wanted. Sorry if it's kind of hard to see. So you measure the specific gravity first, and then once you get to your target specific gravity, you decide whether the glaze is too thick or too thin in the bucket. So this glaze was too thin. When your glaze is too thin, then what you do is flocculate it, and that's what thickens it back up again. So when you have, sorry, just looking at the comments here. So a glaze, let me think. So a glaze that has really low viscosity, it means the particles, there's so much space in between the particles, and the particles aren't physically sticking together. And clay particles, every glaze should have a at least a small amount of clay in it. And clay particles are like magnets, and they attract each other and they stick together. If you add enough water in between the clay particles, then they no longer, it's what's called being dispersed, and they no longer have this strong magnetic charge. When you add a flocculant, what you're doing is you're changing the charge of the particles so that they attract each other again. And when the glaze particles attract each other, it means they stick to each other, and then they also stick better to the bisque. So with this glaze at 1.5, those particles didn't have the ability to really stick and hold on to each other or hold on to the bisque. So I dipped my test tile, I held it in for 6 seconds, which is quite a long time. But then as I pulled it out, all the glaze just runs back off into the bucket, and it doesn't really stick to the test tile. Once I added a flocculant, so this is, I used a saturated Epsom salt solution. Once I added a flocculant, so what I do is I add a little bit at a time. So if I'm using like a 500 gram test, I would just add a couple drops. If I have like, you know, a couple gallons, I would add a teaspoon at a time. And if I had like a really big garbage can bucket like we have at my work, then I add a tablespoon at a time. So you add the flocculant, You mix it really well with a high-speed mixer, and you're gonna notice the glaze is gonna thicken in the bucket. And ways you can tell, you can do the finger dip test where you stick your finger in and pull it out, and if it all runs off and you can, you know, it doesn't give your finger a good coating, then it's too thin. And so you can also judge how long it takes for the glaze to stop moving when you stop stirring. So you can be stirring, and then you stop stirring. And then if the glaze keeps swirling around and around and around the bucket, then I consider that low viscosity, and I would flocculate that glaze. If you stop stirring and the glaze moves for 1 or 2 seconds and then abruptly kind of comes to a halt, that's perfect in my definition. So I'm looking for my glaze when I stop stirring to kind of swirl around once, maybe twice, and then stop. So it doesn't keep going and then slowly slow down. It also doesn't stop immediately after I finish stirring. So you want it kind of somewhere in between. So this is where your opinions, your intuition kind of comes in. But we started with that calculated specific gravity measurement. So we know that the water content is consistent, and then we kind of use our judgment to decide if it's too thick or too thin. So the opposite is true for deflocculating. If when I bring my glaze to specific gravity of 1.5, if it's still really thick in the bucket, then I'm gonna try adding a couple drops of Darvan to that glaze, and again, mix really well, and you'll notice the glaze is gonna thin down. The flocculating and deflocculating, it's really cool and magical when you see it for the first time, because these, you know, a couple of drops of something can completely change the way the particles react in the bucket. Corey, yay, a question. Let me just unmute you. Okay.
So sometimes when I use a solution of Epsom salts, the flow in the bucket ends up being very silky-like and ribbony-like. It doesn't necessarily thicken up. It becomes, I'll get more drips than not. So I've taken to using vinegar more often than I use Epsom salts bath now. Can you talk to that at all? And is it just that I'm putting too much in?
Yeah,
it's like changed. I used to use Epsom salts. I don't like the flow that it is now.
okay. Here, Marion, I'm going to unmute you. Yeah, please put your hands up if you want to say something.
Thanks for taking the question.
I just posted a question that relates to this question, which is sometimes I want to flocculate, so I add Epsom salt and it works, and sometimes I add Epsom salt and it does not do it on that glaze. So
okay.
Maybe.
Okay, so I'll start with Epsom salts versus vinegar. So vinegar is can be used as a flocculant, but what I have found, so I made all these different types of glazes, and I tried flocculating them with Epsom salts and vinegar to see the difference. And some glazes, when a glaze has quite a lot of clay in it to begin with, then the vinegar actually works for flocculating the glaze. If the glaze is low in clay, because it's the clay particles in a glaze recipe that are responding to flocculants and deflocculants. Marion, I'm just going to mute you because I can hear some background noise. Okay. So if the glaze has a sufficient amount of clay in it, then I find that it responds to vinegar. But the glazes, so I tried a glaze that had 90% frit and 10% EPK, so not a lot of clay, and the vinegar wasn't able to flocculate that glaze just because of like the balance of particles. So I also tried a glaze that had absolutely no clay but just bentonite. So the Epsom salts was able to, like the glaze had hard panned, the Epsom salts was able to fix the hard panning, whereas the vinegar was not. And so I know vinegar can help, like, yeah, if your glaze is swirling around and around and you add a bit of vinegar, and then it can kind of, yeah, it congeals, I think is the word. So if the vinegar is working for you, I would say continue to use that. With the Epsom salts not working, are you high speed mixing, Corey? You can nod your head. Not always. So that's really important. The high speed mixing just helps it all to become activated. So I would, if you want to, I'm going to unmute you. If you want to, oh.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I sometimes do, but I don't always. Like if I'm in the middle of a class, for example, and we're using glazes, and if I look at the glaze and it's running off the pots, or just not nice, or it's hard panning, sometimes I'll come by and I'll just add a smidge of the vinegar and I'll stir it up, and it seems to make a big difference very quickly.
Right.
So that's usually with a hand.
Yeah.
As opposed to a high speed mixer.
Yeah. Sophie, I'm going to unmute you. Wait. There.
So vinegar is chemically completely different from Epsom salts, right? Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, and vinegar is, I don't know, something with carbon and a lot of oxygens and hydrogen. Is it working in a similar way, or is it something completely different?
So I'm not sure what vinegar is made of offhand, but what I know is, so another flocculant that exists out there is calcium, calcium chloride, I believe. So calcium chloride, I've not tried it. I hear it's caustic, so you would want to protect your hands, your skin, if you want to use that. But calcium and magnesium are both in the second column of the periodic table, and so they have a +2 valence. And so I believe that it's that +2 that gives it the flocculating effect, whereas a deflocculant, you can have sodium, which is a +1 valence, or ammonia, which is also +1. And so it's the ions that are in the glaze, and they're being attracted to the clay particles. So it's possible that whatever is the flocculating material in vinegar, the ions have a +2 charge, and so it's the way that they are interacting with the clay particles. So that's what causes the particles to attract or repel each other. So yeah, so that's kind of my theory. That I'm not exactly sure, but those are the patterns that I've seen. So I'm not sure what it is about vinegar and why it works sometimes and it's less effective other times. Okay, so I'm gonna unmute Corey and I'll unmute Dawn as well.
So is there also, so I've, a couple of days ago I went to undo my Darvan container, and it had congealed and became hard, goopy syrup, right? Like hard. Is there any way to reconstitute that, or is that now just a lovely bottom of a bucket container goopy thing that needs to go in the garbage?
Is it a liquid still?
It's like a sap. It's like a hard sap. Like if I dug it out, you'd go, and there'd be this stream of hardish.
So my thoughts on that are, like, the only thing that can change is water can evaporate. And so if it is a water-based substance and water has evaporated, and that's why it's thickened, then that you could add water to reconstitute it, maybe. But I haven't come across that myself, and I haven't tried to fix it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
The other thing, by the way, that I do is in my throwing water, I'll put a splash of vinegar in that as well.
Okay.
From years ago, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I had gone to a workshop and someone did that. So without knowing what I'm doing, I've been doing on and off. I do that though. Yeah. Or in the big slop bucket of, like, everybody puts their splash pan stuff and trimmings and whatnot into buckets, I'll often put just a splash of vinegar before I mix it all up to reconstitute it and re-veg it out.
Yeah, I don't actually know. We add vinegar to our reclaim at work, and on my recipe, I just wrote splash of vinegar for good luck, because I don't know that it does anything, but it's like this, it's been passed on through the generations. Add vinegar to your glaze, it makes it better. And I don't know the science behind it, so I can't really stand behind it completely 100%, but I know that it doesn't hurt anything and it might be helping, so why not?
Okay. And it's just still speaking about vinegar, I also mix, vinegar and dry clay scraps to fix as a repair. Sometimes I'll add toilet paper to it. Other times I won't. I'll just, get some dry stuff into a little container with some vinegar. And so when students have to repair something, or I do, it's they're not adding water to the clay, so that clay isn't going to. My understanding is, it's not going to shrink anymore.
Right.
It just fills in the cracks and.
Yeah. If that's what vinegar is doing, but to me that would be deflocculating. I don't know. I mean, just like vinegar is mostly water. Usually you get like 5%, like it's all water, and there's like 5% acetic acid. And so, okay. But I don't know that, I don't, like, I would add minimal water to, if I wanted to repair a crack, I would add minimal water to dry clay scraps, just enough to get them wet. Yep. And then I would add Darvan, because Darvan is going to thin it down. I mean, it depends what you're trying to repair. So if you're trying to make a slip that doesn't shrink, then I would want a liquid that has minimal water in it. So Darvan is going to make it more fluid without adding extra water. And it's the water that shrinks that leads to the cracking. And so, but if you're trying to like fill, like use like plastic clay to like kind of fill a crack, I can't say that I know what the vinegar would do, and if it's better than water.
It's what I do. However, I hadn't thought to put Darvan in that instead. And I guess my lack of understanding was that vinegar was vinegar and it wasn't water.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure vinegar is, has a high percentage of water in it. Okay. So, but if it's working, I say go for it.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, Don.
Vinegar itself is, like you said, mostly water and acetic acid. And I was just reading that the acetate component of the vinegar is negatively charged. So that might be the flocculating component.
Okay. Negatively charged. Yeah. I mean,
I know I just dove into a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, the thing is so clay particles are, what is it? They have negatively charged faces. So a clay, Sophie, you want to talk? No, okay. Clay particles have negatively charged faces. So a clay particle is like a thin playing card. So they're wide and very flat. And so the faces are negatively charged, and then the edges are positive and negatively charged. And so when you introduce a flocculant, from my understanding is the flocculant is positively charged, and it is being attracted, it's bonding with the negative faces of the clay particle, and then the faces, and I might have negative and positive backwards, but basically the faces are attracted to the edges, and you get this house of cards like open network where all the clay particles attract to each other. So if you have a negatively charged ions, like if that's what vinegar is adding, I could see the negatively charged ions being attracted possibly to the positively charged edges of a clay particle. And then that's how, I don't know, actually. I haven't really looked into like the the chemistry of vinegar and how it reacts with clay. So I'm sorry that I can't really answer that question. Okay, does anyone else want to raise their hand and ask me a question live? I have lots of, oh, Wendy, okay. And Corey, I see, I might get back to you, Corey. Okay, Wendy, I'm clicking the unmute button. Doesn't seem to be working.
But Wendy, as you click the unmute button, you can click on your screen of your face, and then you can unmute yourself to actually unmute it. Like, so you're releasing it, Sue, and then she has to unmute it, I think.
Oh, there you go.
Right now, I'm just buying store-bought glazes for now, and I do a lot of hand painting instead of dunking, because I make hand pieces. After a while, they go a bit thick. What's the best solution to make them a little on thick?
Right. So they're most likely thickening because the water is evaporating. And I mean, I would just add a bit of water. Like I've never worked with commercial glazes, so I don't have the experience with trying to reconstitute them. But my intuition tells me that water, water is the only thing that is being released from these glazes over time. And so adding water back in should help. And I would just add a little bit at a time, like don't overdo it. Because if you add too much water, especially to brushing glazes, you can have issues with cracking. So a glaze with too much water can shrink too much, and therefore it will crack as it dries. So just add like a little bit at a time, give it a really good mix until you get it to a good brushing consistency.
Okay. One more quick question.
Okay.
When I start making my own glazes for hand painting, so, I won't be making big batches, just small batches. Would you use the same chemical solution? Like the 100% on your glazeorg.org, you say you always want up to 100%, and then you add your colorants?
Okay. Yeah. So a glaze recipe generally adds up to 100%. Okay. So each of the materials are in a different proportion to each other. And so a different percentage, and so that all adds up to 100. So you would still make the full 100% of a recipe, but if you want to make a small, a little container like this, I would make 500 grams. And in order to make 500 grams of a glaze recipe, you take all the percentages and you multiply by 5. So you can look at that 100% as though that would make 100 grams of glaze. And then if you want 500 grams of glaze, you just multiply everything by 5, including the colorants.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay. Does anyone else want to?
I do have something from a previous question.
Okay.
Towards the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Going back to the purchasing of glaze ingredients.
Yes.
Plainsman Clay has Alberta Slip, the Albany replacement, and they also have Raven Scrag Slip.
Yes.
Which are two magical little ingredients, and they have on their website ways of mixing those ingredients for like an Alberta Slip base glaze is, for instance, 40% calcined Alberta Slip, 40% of the raw straight from the bag, and then 20% Ferrofrit 3134, and it makes a nice clear amber glaze.
Yes.
So it's a 2 ingredient glaze. You just got to do a little calcining of your own in the kiln later on. But then this leads to a second point of they also have a glaze where you add 4% rutile to that recipe, and you get a nice robin's egg blue. Well, it likes to run a lot when thick. It does something like this to your kiln shelf.
Okay.
So this is how I found you, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I was looking at ways of fixing this glaze. So I started by lowering the, oh wow, I just lost the not the flocculation, but the,
Specific gravity?
thank you, sorry about that, specific gravity, and I got this, nowhere near what I wanted.
Yes.
So then I started playing with the specific gravity some more. I found a happy medium of where it was going blue-ish and not going off the pot, but then flocculating it after that to turn it into this.
Okay.
So
they're
nice,
they're all very different.
yes. and one leans to anger and an angle grinder.
Yeah. So did you measure the specific gravity of the one that ran off the pot?
Yeah, it's about 152.
Okay. And then where did you bring it down to?
I brought it. I went under, so I went to about 145, and that gave me the ugly brown.
Okay.
So 149 gave me the happy medium.
Yes.
And then Epsom salts gave me the final product.
Yes. And are you happy with the final product?
Very.
Okay, good. That's perfect. And I will say that we use that glaze recipe. So are you talking about that 80% Ravenscraig, 20% Frit?
It started off as Alberta slip. Yeah,
Right.
The 80-20 ratio, and then 4% rutile.
And that's the glaze that you're showing me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because did you use Alberta slip or Ravenscraig slip?
Alberta slip.
Okay. So we use the 80-20 Ravenscraig slip recipe at the studio where I work.
Or clear.
That was the old clear until I got complaints that it was kind of had this yellowish tinge to it. And so then I created a new clear. But we use it for the white. So we add 10% Zircopax.
Oh, I love that glaze.
Yeah. And we actually don't calcine any of it. So we just use, and I don't know if the Ravenscraig slip is different than the Alberta slip. It might be that the Alberta slip shrinks more. And so that's why you need to calcine some of it. But we just use the 80-20. We keep the specific gravity at 1.5. The color doesn't change because it's just white, just with Zircopax. But with a higher specific gravity, it can run. And so we keep it around 1.45 to 1.5. And then that's that. So
okay, because I've been calcining my Ravenscraig as well, just off of the website's suggestion, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could try it maybe without, because we don't calcine it. And I do calcine clay for other recipes, but we haven't really had, like that glaze, we have had crawling issues with, you know what crawling is, where the glaze kind of peels back and exposes the clay underneath. So we have had those issues with that particular glaze when the specific gravity was way too high. But once we brought it down, no crawling issues, everything seems to be good. And we don't calcine any of it. So
be able to skip a step. I like that idea. I'll try that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so anyone else? I kind of like this conversational format better than, sorry about all the pre-submitted questions. I will find a way to answer them all for you at some point. But I do like interacting with all of you guys. So if anyone else wants to talk, Karen. So you're unmuted. Hi, Karen. Nice to see you.
Thanks. I just wanted to say thank you. This is so great.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. You've had this question from me already, and I still don't I just can't seem to get any answers.
Okay.
I've got this. Right now we're using Vashon white paper clay. Just using it for now. And I have my trusted glaze recipes that I've been using for years. And I've noticed that the Vashon white paper clay is not playing nicely with my clear glaze. And I've tried a number of them. I've tried changing specific gravity. I have tried different recipes, and I'm kind of tested out, to be honest. And I'm just wondering if anybody has used this clay, and if they've got a good clear that they'd be willing to turn me on to.
So what's the issues that you've been noticing with?
Of course. So it's a crazing.
Oh, crazing.
I think it's a fit issue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because we use that clay at my work, and so our clear does actually craze over top of it. Yeah. So I don't necessarily have a clear recipe that I could suggest that I've tested. But yeah, as I was saying earlier, like if you're into the UMF and the chemistry and everything, there's two ways to get rid of crazing. You either lower the R2O or you increase the silica and alumina. And so while keeping the ratio the same. So if you wanted to play with glaze formulas and just try to do that, it's hard. It's really hard, like when you're first starting out with the chemistry, because when you lower one thing, everything else goes up, and you kind of have to like keep everything in balance, and so it can be tricky. But I'm sorry that I don't offhand have a clear recipe that I can offer that won't craze. Yeah, so if anyone, Matthew.
Hey, so I was gonna say, I don't know if you all have used Insight Live yet. That's the Digital Fire, his glaze calculator.
Yep.
And unlike the Glazy calculator, he estimates expansion rate. So what you could do particularly is maybe put in the glaze that you're using, see what it calculates as the expansion, and then you could adjust it, keeping your alumina silica ratio the same, maybe adjust the, like you said, the flux ratio, and try to lower it, and then test it and see if you get any results with that.
Yeah, and so what, from my understanding, is the thermal expansion that it calculates isn't completely accurate,
Right.
But it's a good kind of like starting point, so you can kind of compare recipes.
Right.
Yeah, so you could like plug in a recipe and see that it has, I think it's kind of like a theoretical thermal expansion.
Right. So what he describes it as being like useful if you're adjusting a particular glaze with those particular
issues.
Right. So like as opposed to trying a bunch of different glazes, if you're adjusting one, you're going to get a better idea of how that expansion changes.
Right, because you're going to watch it go up and down.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, Insight Live is the website for the software, and it is a paid subscription, but I think it's only like $20 a year or something.
Yeah, it's not much.
Yeah, I have it. I use it as well because I used it before Glazy existed, and so I keep all my old glaze recipes are in there with like prices calculated and everything. So yeah, so I still use that for some things. Yes, Corey, and I'll unmute Paoletta.
If somebody does want to try another clear glaze, I have a really great one that seems to be good. And at one time it crazed, like years later it would craze on the pieces. It doesn't seem to do that anymore because I've changed some of the levels a bit. But if anybody wants that, they can find me either on Facebook or Instagram or through my website, Corey Sandler Pottery, or CoreySandler.com, or through any of those other ones, which is Quarry Sand or Pottery, and I'm happy to send that off. Or I could send it to you, Sue, and you
Sure.
you could look at it, and if you want to distribute it to everybody, it's a
Yeah.
base. It's just a great clear base.
Yeah, like, would you mind, are you in my Facebook group?
I believe that I am. I
Like-
don't have the rest of, I put it on right now, but it's in my studio and I'm upstairs, so I'm not there.
Yeah, so if you wanted to share it in there, or you could send it to me, and if you, if I have your permission to share it in there, I could do that.
Yeah, send it
Or I can pass it on to
Okay.
Karen, because I do have Karen's email, and
Okay.
yeah.
Here.
Okay.
The other question that I had was, I know we were talking about thermal expansion and such before. So this, for example, is there's about 8 or 9 glazes on that on the outside, and then I use another glaze on the inside. And very often, depending on what's going on the outside, over time, I will end up with crazing on the inside.
Okay.
Of my satiny white or my clear or whatever. Not so much the clear, but a satin white.
Okay. And so it doesn't always craze.
Doesn't always, but depends on how matte the outside is.
Okay.
So if my outside is very matte, the inside is not, like, it's not very happy. And in that same, so 2 questions. That's one, and the other one happens to do with cutlery marking on white. So I've done a whole bunch of testing on white glazes, or taking a glaze and adding Zercopax to it and trying to both shiny and matte. And if I want it to be not so shiny, shiny is not the problem. It says you thin that shine down to satin or matte, that you then get cutlery marking, key marking. And
Yep.
Any thoughts, any glazes, anybody want to offer anything up for a good liner that will, not just a liner, but something that you can use as a nice white glaze, or a whitish glaze that also can break?
But not shiny.
Not shiny, and that has some life to it, that isn't, like cardboard.
Right. Yeah. So my understanding of cutlery marking, a matte glaze is crystals growing inside a glass. And so those crystals have little edges, and those little edges are enough to, what I heard is that it depends on the quality of your cutlery. So if you have like super high quality cutlery, it's going to be, the metal is harder than the glaze, and so it's not going to be leaving bits of metal behind. Because all cutlery is like, if your cutlery is so soft that when it rubs, because glazes are really, really hard. When they're formulated properly, they're quite hard. And so if the glaze is harder, you know how like a soft, hard crystal can scratch a soft crystal. It's kind of like that. And so any kind of not completely smooth surface has the potential to cutlery mark. And I've noticed like all of my matte glazes, they all cutlery mark as well. And it's only the glossy glazes that I haven't had this issue. And I have cheap cutlery. So, yeah, it's a big problem. Like, it's an aesthetic annoyance more than anything.
Spoons on the inside of a mug will eventually, show up. And I, as someone who sells lots of mugs, I don't want that to happen for my clients,
Yeah, so I would try to find a glaze that's like in between matte and glossy. So it's just just glossy enough, but not like super reflective shiny. That
Okay.
might be the way to go.
Yeah, it might be a mixing of the two, which I understand, but I was
Right.
hoping that there was an easier fix than that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Paoletta. Hi.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the issue with regards to the crazing, something that I've been playing around with because I'm trying to develop a glossy glaze, and I've been testing many. And I did read that adding a little bit of lithium and replacing it with some of the sodium can help with the expansion contraction rate. So I have been experimenting with that. I have had some success. I wouldn't do more than, I think, 1 or 2%, but it was just an idea maybe to pass along.
Yeah, so lithium, okay, so I mentioned that the R2O has the highest thermal expansion. So sodium is the highest. potassium is the second highest of all of our glaze materials. Lithium is actually quite low. So I mentioned you can replace some of the R2O with RO. That's going to reduce crazing. But if you can replace some of your sodium with lithium, yeah, that is also going to lower the thermal expansion. And so there's lithium carbonate. There's also pedalite and spodumene, which are lithium containing ingredients. And the issue with lithium carbonate, so if you're just adding 1 or 2%, that's okay, but lithium carbonate is slightly soluble, and so you can get some issues where when your glaze materials are soluble, it means that they're part of the water. And so when you dip your piece into the glaze and then the bisque sucks the water into the bisque, any soluble materials are going to be sucked into the bisque. And then as the water evaporates, they get deposited on the thinner and the higher points of your piece. And so all those lithium carbonate particles that have dissolved in the glaze are then being kind of distributed unevenly around your piece. So you can get so most of the evaporation usually happens like on the rims of a piece. And you can really see this if you use chinos that have high amounts of soda ash, because you can actually see the ash, the salt crystals on the dried glaze. But yeah, so I'm just cautioning against using too much lithium carbonate because it kind of throws the chemistry of your glaze off. But you can use spodumene and pedalite as sources of lithium. The issue with those are that they contain high amounts of silica and alumina. So with lithium carbonate, you're just getting the lithium. So you really, like 1% is actually quite a lot. Whereas if you wanted to increase the lithium by adding spodumene, then you're also increasing the silica and alumina. So you would have to lower the silica and alumina accordingly.
With regards to lithium,
yes.
A little while ago, I was heading out of town and I had a kiln load to do, and I mixed up a glaze that I hadn't mixed up in a while, but it was a very lovely glaze that I have, just a different color of a different base. And 4 o'clock in the morning, I did what I do, and oh my gosh, looked around my studio. Oh, I like what that glaze does. So to my glaze, I added 6% lithium. And went away, put the kiln on, and went, oh my God, I'm going to come home to everything melting on the kiln shells. I didn't. I came home to the most beautiful new glaze.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's one of those odd chemicals. Yeah. And 6% I knew was a lot of it. Like it probably would have been beautiful at 3%. Yeah. And I was really lucky. But I didn't know that that's what it does, that it leaves the kiln, it leaves the bisque and comes to the rims, and it was really beautiful. So if you have a glaze that you like and you just want to test, lithium is a really interesting magical ingredient.
Yeah, and it can lead to breaking, like, so when you have texture, if you have, lithium also lowers the viscosity, the melted viscosity of the glaze in the kiln. So if you have, lithium starts melting at a lower temperature. So if you have textures, lithium can help kind of break over those high points on your clay. So like lithium, as long as you understand the way it works, it can be a good ingredient that can cause a lot of variation and like special effects and surprises that might be good surprises. Sometimes they might not be good, but it is a very powerful flux. And so your glaze that you added it to was probably not at the verge of running to begin with. But if you had added that to a more fluid glaze, then you probably would have had a disaster. But luckily, yeah, it was like this happy little experiment that worked out really well.
Don't do what I do. Test it.
Yeah.
Don't do a whole glaze kiln full of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a great mistake. Not mistake. Great.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Happy
mistake.
Accident or something. Yeah. And Paoletta, did you have something else?
No, I just
that you wanted.
Yeah, lots of information to process. So
yes,
thank you.
Okay, cool, excellent.
And thank you for the explanation of the lithium as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, I see. Dawn, do you have another question? I'm going to wrap this up at 2 o'clock, so my time, so that's in 16 minutes. So just to let you know, that's about as long as I can talk without
For
losing
that,
my voice.
So for the matte white, the Raven Scrag white, I fire that with my blue, so I do a slow cool down so I can get the crystal growth into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to make it a little bit more semi-matte, so that might be a good starting point for somebody who's looking for a white glaze, and then over a darker clay body it kind of breaks nice and shows a little bit of the action below the surface. I think it looks more like a thick donut glaze.
Oh, yeah. So just slowing down the cooling cycle.
Yeah, slow down the cooling cycle, promote a little crystal growth in the surface of it. That way it goes a little more semi-gloss than full-on gloss. And I haven't had a problem with crazing nor cutlery marks yet.
Right. Okay. So that could be something that you try, Corey, for your cutlery marking.
It was one of the bases that I did a test of, and that was fine. Yeah, it was just a bit shiny. And I think I did it slow, but I'll check and see if I did that one in a slow fire or not.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, Karen.
Hey, I've got a Fredrickson, and then I've also got a couple of Scott kilns. Could you post your cooling cycle down? I'm a bit of a slow learner when it comes to programming my kiln, so I need it to be actually like step by step. Do this, put this number in, punch that, put that number in, punch that, put that number in. Is there a slow cooling cycle just for that crystal growth that somebody could share with us?
I could if somebody else doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, Dawn, do you have
That's what I'm looking for right now.
Yeah, we don't actually program a slow cool into our firings at work, and I have sitter kilns at home, so I'm still old school that way.
Okay.
So I found it on digitalfire.com under the reference library.
Okay.
It is a firing schedule labeled as C6 DHSC. So if you search Digital Fire's reference library with that number, hopefully you should find that cooling. And that's a slow cool for reactive glazes is what they call it. Were you able to get that number down?
No, hang on a second. Okay, go ahead. C.
I'll put it in the chat. How's that?
Oh, that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, in the Digital Fire. Cool.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
So I just want to say I'm sorry I've missed all of your comments. So if you have been asking me questions, I'm sorry that I'm not ignoring you on purpose. Hey Kit, did you have a question?
Hi Sue.
Hi.
I miss you.
I miss you too.
I thought I'd tell you a funny story.
Okay, sure.
So between learning from you and a bit of online with Matt Katz, I took my grocery list to our local potter supply guy.
Yes.
And sort of hands shaking, I'm like, hey, I'd like to get these ingredients. I'm going to start making some glazes. And he gives me this really withering look. And he looks at my list and he's like, it takes a lot. I think he's looking at my gray hair. He's like, it takes a lot of years to learn how to mix glazes. Maybe you should stick to the commercial.
Is this in Victoria?
Yeah. So
I'm not, can't say I'm surprised, but.
It's funny. I mean, I took it as like, yep, that's kind of what I should have expected. And so I just kind of backed out the door. I'm like, you just lost a lot of business. I mean, I have a friendly relationship with him, so I know not to take it too seriously. That's his shtick. But it did give me pause, and so I never bought the ingredients yet. So I'm wondering, are you buying online, or do you take a trip up island? What's your go-to place?
We order from Parksville, Vancouver Island Pottery Supply, and they ship it down to us, but we order a pallet at a time.
Like your personal stuff, if you're not buying large quantities, or do you just roll it into what you're getting? for the studio?
I could do that. I haven't had to buy anything since I started working there, just lack of time. But I used to, because I have family that lives in Vancouver. So every time, I used to get my dad to shop at Green Barn for me.
Yeah.
And bring it over. So that's what I used to do.
Okay.
Yeah, but I know Green Barn doesn't sell to the island. So that, like, if I was on my own, that's what I would do. I would order from Vancouver Island Pottery Supply.
Up in Nanaimo.
Up in Parksville.
Parksville, yeah. Okay, we'll do it. Is anybody buying online? I don't know if the shipping charges because it's all weighty stuff, right?
Actually, what I can say, I also get from Vancouver Island Pottery Supply. I don't do online with them. But if you get stuff, so I'm an old Ontarian, and PSH or Pottery Supply House, they have a flat rate ship of $12.
Okay.
And I don't know how they do it, but they do it for, you have to give them a call first and ask them about the chemicals. Would that work? But if they can fit certain things, just check. It depends on how much you're ordering of things.
Yeah.
But you might want to check with them, not to take business away from the valley here in the island, but or ask them what their costs are. But I think they're probably more expensive.
Yeah.
I know that we pay for 1,800-pound pallet. We only pay $110 for shipping. Which I think that's 40 boxes of clay. So I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
So if you were just ordering, a few materials, it would probably maybe be $20 or I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or get a bunch of your friends together who can order things together, have them at one drop place, and everybody comes to pick up on the day, so nobody is laden with a huge amount that they have to manage.
Yeah, so I won't be dissuaded. I will figure it out.
You can do it.
No, don't let him discourage you.
Oh, funny.
Well, but my very first experience with him was before I ever went to clay school. This was in 2008. And I had signed up for 2-year art school in ceramics. And I was in Victoria. And I went there and I said, I'm going to pottery school for 2 years. And what do you recommend as a beginner starter kit? And he said, 2 years in pottery school? Never heard of it. And he didn't give me a recommendation. And then I looked around and I saw this beginner's toolkit. And I was like, maybe I'll just try this. And yeah, just not the most encouraging when you're starting your journey in ceramics. You should just quit now.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the impression. I'm like, you run a business, man.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, Wendy has a question. And anyone else with a question, put your hand up now. And then, okay, Kathleen has a question. And I just want to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered.
Hi.
Okay, I'll start with Kathleen and I'll move to Wendy. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Actually, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to say I'm on Texada Island and I order from the Vancouver Island Pottery Supply and I can get 300 to 500 pounds, which in clay doesn't actually take up that much space. So about $75.
Nice.
So, and that's all the way to an island coming over the ferry on Comox. So I'm sure on island, if you email, I think it's Barb there at Vancouver Island Supply, she's great at that. As long as you find a shipper, they're really good at packing up and shipping stuff.
Nice. That's a good tip. Yeah. I don't know where Kit went, but I'll let her know. I'll make sure she knows that. Okay, and Wendy, you're up.
We're moving to just outside Vernon. What is there a place around there? Do you know that you can buy stuff?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's I would assume Kelowna is the biggest city around there. I don't know if they have a pottery supply place. I know when I was in Nelson, in the Kootenays, we were ordering from Vancouver.
Okay.
Or even from Ontario. So depending what we were looking for.
One of my students was saying that she ordered a bunch of things from a place called the Sanding Stone. And I think they're in Calgary. I don't know of them, but she said they were some great prices and great things they had there.
Ah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Thank you.
I think it's called the
Awesome.
Sanding Stone, but
Okay, because my sisters are in Calgary and we'll just be a day's drive away, so you can do a day visit.
Sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. The Sounding Stone in Winnipeg,
okay.
Naomi says.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone else want to talk? We got 6 minutes. This has been really fun. Hopefully I can see all you guys.
I'll say just a reminder, just a quick reminder to everybody who's on Clay Buddies that starting on Monday, we're going to be doing a bunch of workshops. And if anybody wants to tag in and watch a bunch, it'll be a great week of stuff. I think I'm on at 4 o'clock on Monday doing handles and, you know,
Nice.
Central Time. But
is that in lieu of Nsika? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's amazing. Yeah.
Like the whole week, like from 9 to 10 every day. There's always something planned. So that's kind of fun.
Okay. So that's in the Clay Buddies Facebook group.
Yes.
So you guys are just like going live in the group?
Yeah, there's a schedule that's been set up.
Yeah.
And those who wanted to participate were able to sign into the schedule and do whatever it is they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the day of, kind of get ready and then go live.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's as far as I know what's happening. I have to look and see, but I think that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing.
That's just Clay Buddies on Facebook?
It's a Clay Buddies group, so make certain that you're part of that group. And if you're not a part of it, it's a great, I don't know, there's like 35,000 people in it or something. It's huge. And it's a lovely group that people get to hang out together, and a lot of us do Facebook Lives on there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap this up? Thank you all for coming. This was really fun. I wish it went a little bit more smoothly with like letting people talk, but I'm going to figure it out for next time. And I might just ask people, like the first 100 people, I'll just, I think I can have 100 people as panelists. So yeah, I'm going to try it again, and I'm going to try to make it better every time. So, and I will try to, if I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry. And okay, I won't apologize. Naomi says, don't apologize. But I hope to get to all your questions in some capacity at some point. So,
because I'm unmuted, I just want to say, Sue, you are really doing a great service for our community. It's lovely that you're making, glazing so accessible for so many who are really new, and making it so easy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. I could talk all day long about glazes. There's so much I wanted to say that I didn't get a chance. So yeah, I'm going to do this again next Friday, probably a little earlier in the day. So you'll all be getting an email probably on Tuesday about that. So I hope to see some of you again. And as always, just get in touch. You can email me, or if you have questions, like please post them to my Facebook group. I let I don't know, almost 50 people in every day, and but there isn't a lot of conversation happening in there. Like it comes in waves, and so I want to encourage people to post your questions on there, and we can all help each other and answer. And I like to answer questions in there as well. Because it's hard for me to respond to individual emails when I could be answering questions for everybody. So yeah, so thank you everyone so much, and I'm gonna let you go now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Stay safe, huh?
You too.